Hey, thanks for clicking on the video, and this is the knife I'll be restoring. I'd made this sheath and the handle for this blade when I was probably 17, and it was pretty poorly executed, as you can see. It needs a little work. It's been sitting in a drawer for a long time now, and it's finally time to redo this. I'm going to get the rivets drilled out and get the handle a little better shaped, and with any luck I might even redo the sheath and make it a lot nicer than what it is. So first let's get these rivets drilled out. So while I'm drilling out these rivets, I'll explain how I got the blade. My brother and I were playing outside when we were probably 12 or 13, and we played in the driveway and we scraped the little roads and we played with Hot Wheels and Matchbox cars. We would lay bricks down and boards and pretend they were buildings and build our own little imaginary city. And one day while I was scraping out one of the roads, I hit something metal in the ground and I pried this blade out of the dirt. It was very pitted and rusty, but I thought it was neat. I showed it to my dad. He let me use some sandpaper and a wire brush, and I cleaned up the blade the best I could. Eventually, years later, I put the handle on it, and then eventually I worked at a state park where I had access to some historians. Well, I took it in, and one of the historians looked at it and said that it was likely a skinning blade that fur harvesters in Michigan would have used many, many, many years before, and the person that lost it was probably very upset. So then, to my good fortune, I peeled it out of the dirt. So it's kind of important to me. I thought it was really neat. It's a nice memory. But here now I'm getting the rivets out, and you can see that I used nails as rivets because, well, that's what I had access to at the time. But we're going to try to make something a little nicer. So now I'm taking some sandpaper and just hand sanding it. And this isn't very interesting, but what I wanted to add is that I do have a belt sander with a metal blade on it. I could have quickly done it with that, but I wanted to really take efforts to preserve the metal as much as possible and not sand any more away than I had to. So now it's time to choose the wood for the handle, and I'm going with cherry again. And this particular piece of cherry was firewood that ended up in my yard from a logging operation. So yeah, I think it's kind of neat that Michigan cherry is going back on this blade I found in Michigan. Once I cut the core out of this thing, I'll have some nice quarter sawn grain on the outside that'll be very stable and nice for the handle. So then over at the table saw, I ripped it just a little bit wide, and I was left with a very nice piece of cherry, like I said. After that, it's just a matter of getting the blade laid out on the blank. I'll be using a bandsaw to cut out the shape, so I like to use a fine tip marker to get the layout lines down so they're very defined and I can see them well. So then over at the bandsaw, I carefully cut just outside the layout lines and cut out the blank. So now if you're wondering how we jumped way ahead, it's because somehow I lost a bunch of video footage. I'm not sure how, but it's gone. But all I did was leave the blank a little oversized. I cut it in half on the table saw, drilled out the holes, cut one larger brass pin for the center hole, but I didn't have any smaller brass pins, and I opted to use some brass bolts. In retrospect, I wish I wouldn't have done that, but hindsight's 20/20. And now, as you can see, I'm adding some 5-minute epoxy to both sides of the blade to get the handle to bond very well. I'm using epoxy on the brass pins as well. I didn't test fit this because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get the brass pins back out, and I didn't have one of the holes aligned just perfectly, and I really struggled with that, but in the end I did eventually get it. So then I let it sit overnight, and I came back the next day, and the epoxy is set, and it's time to start shaping the handle. So over at the belt sander, I just very carefully went through and sanded it down to just barely touching the metal. I wanted that metal band to show all the way around lengthwise on the handle. I will note that the blade at this point is actually quite dull. It still could cut me if it grabbed and pulled out of my hand, but it is very dull, and I'm trying to be cautious and not use a ton of pressure and sand very slowly. So after I got the profile shaped out, I did get it just down to the metal, so it was just a little shine on that, not taking too much metal away. It's very boxy, obviously, at this point, but it feels okay in my hand size-wise. I just need to get back over to the belt sander and kind of hand shape this into a more rounded design that feels very comfortable. So now over at the belt sander again, this time I'm sitting down, so I'm in a very comfortable position and not leaning over. I want to really take my time on this. As everyone well knows, once you take wood off, you can't very well put it back. And this handle's epoxied on there, so it's kind of a one-shot deal here. I opted to put 4 grooves around the bottom side of it so that your fingers sit comfortably in those grooves, and it just feels like your hand won't slip forward or backward on the blade. At least that was the idea. So I just took my time and cautiously snuck up on that comfortable fit. After I was done at the belt sander, I just hand sanded it through the grits up to 300. I got it very smooth, and it was time to put some finish on it. I wanted to seal the wood a little bit, and I was in a little more of a hurry at this point because I had to get up the next morning, and I wanted to get the first coat of finish on it before bed. So I used shellac, de-waxed shellac to be specific, because you can put finish over it. Shellac dries incredibly fast, so I put 1 coat of shellac on it and set it aside, and about an hour and a half later I was able to come back and put my first official coat of finish on it. So a little bit later I came back and the shellac was very dry. I sanded it once again very lightly to scuff the surface and smooth out the finish very nicely with some 300 grit. I taped off the blade, and now I'm going to use wiping polyurethane on it. I don't buy wiping poly because it's kind of a scam, honestly. It's just thinned down polyurethane. So if you just take regular polyurethane and mix it 50-50 with mineral spirits, you can put very thin coats on that dry pretty fast, and they won't run. So that's what I'm doing here. So over the course of the next day, I got about 6 or 7 coats of that oil-based wiping polyurethane on it, and the blade's looking very shiny, and it should be pretty durable. And now, don't fault my choice in t-shirts because Scooby-Doo rocks. Anyhow, what I'm doing here with all this leather, of course, is going to make the sheath. I have all kinds of scraps. I actually got a really good deal, $25, and I got like a garbage bag full of leather scraps. They come in handy quite a bit. I've not really worked with leather, so not really the best teacher on this. I'm kind of learning as I go on this, so we're going to learn together. I may not be doing it the best way. People that have worked with leather can go ahead and comment and tell me the folly of my ways. It did work in the end, but I'm kind of floundering through this process. So after watching a bunch of YouTube instruction on how to do some leather work, I want to shape a specific piece around, or mold the piece around the knife. And I learned that you can soak it in water and put it in a press essentially and conform it to the shape you want. And when it dries, it should stay that way. So in the water it goes. And now I could tell you what I'm doing, but, well, you're just going to have to wait and find out. There is a method to this madness. So I'm drawing another blank for the blade of the knife, and you'll see pretty soon why I'm doing that. So then it was over to the bandsaw to cut that blank out. Again, I carefully cut outside the line, and when I was done, I took it to the belt sander and sanded right up to the line. Now it's time to probably tell you what this is, if you haven't guessed already. I cut out that first piece of leather in the shape of the blade because when I put the knife in the sheath, I want it to not be pressing against the part where your belt is. So I'm shimming out the blade, the thickness of the handle on one side, so that way it fits vertically very nicely into the sheath. So clearly you can see I used some spray adhesive to bond that leather to that wood blank. Now it's all dried and it's ready to proceed. So this is basically going to be used as the form that I'm going to shape the wet leather around. I'm putting a piece of plastic down as an interface so that wet leather doesn't soak through and into this wood and this other leather. So now that's what I'll do, is I'll try to get this thing pressed. And the method I'd use to do that is another YouTube dive into leather stuff, but I have some medium density foam, and I have a couple layers of it I saved from some packing material, and I'm going to use that to compress because it will conform and squish basically the leather into shape. and then you just need to wait and let it dry. So a few days later, I took it out of the form, and I couldn't believe it. It actually did work, and it conformed it into the shape I wanted. So then I took my blank and I used some more adhesive and I stuck it to a sheet of leather. This will act as the back of the sheath. Now I'll use some more adhesive and stick the conform piece over the blank on top of the back piece. Now I realize this isn't going to hold very well, but this is just a temporary bond so I can get it more permanently affixed. So while I was waiting for that leather tack to set up, I went ahead and sharpened the knife. I used some diamond stones and then a leather strop, and I got the knife pretty dang sharp, surprisingly well for a blade that sat in the dirt for who knows how long. So then I used a knife and I just trimmed around the outside of the sheath. I eyeballed the offset on this. The main thing is I needed, about 1/4 of an inch. The intention is I'm going to punch a bunch of holes in this and use some leather cord to sew around the outside of this to hold it together. And then I didn't record that process because it really isn't that interesting. At least I didn't think so. But I punched a bunch of holes and I wound the leather through it as tight as I could. And when it dried, it even pulled it a little bit tighter. I drilled some relief holes at the top and the bottom of the slat. That's going to be the belt loop. And now I took a knife and just cut those slots. And now it's finally time to slide the knife into the sheath for the first time. And kind of slides in nice. It's got a good friction fit with the leather on both sides of the blade, and I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. For never having done any leather stuff before, I'm happy with it. Now I could use the knife, it's very functional, but I really made it to be on display. So I built this box for it, and it'll go on the wall, and that way I can stare at it and call it my precious. But what I would really like is if you guys would leave a comment. Most of the time people don't, and I would really love to hear what you think. So thank you very much for watching.